What's up guys, my name is Ace, and welcome back to another gun guide. This is the series where I go into great detail with all of the stats of every one of the weapons in Modern Warfare, and in today's episode we're finally moving into the sniper category, and we're going to be covering the Dragunov. So first up, as always, let's have a look at the damage profile. Up close, we're going to be dealing 63 damage to the limbs, 70 damage to the lower torso, and 136 damage to the upper torso. So you really have to hit that upper torso shot if you want the one-shot kill. However, we do have a range limit to this, and therefore it will drop below that one-shot kill potential to the body, and you'll have to shoot them in the head at longer ranges. Speaking of headshots, within multiplayer at least, we get a 2x headshot multiplier, which means we deal 140 damage to the head up close and exactly 100 damage to the head at longer ranges. This means as long as you're hitting the headshot, you will always get a one-shot kill in core game modes, and in hardcore, anywhere in the body will be a one-shot kill at any range unless you're shooting through some form of cover. Now, for Warzone, it is worth noting that almost all of the stats carry over to Warzone. However, there is one big exception, and this is the headshot multiplier. For all of the sniper rifles, we have a different headshot multiplier within Warzone. And for the Dragunov, it's a 2.5 times multiplier, which means our headshot damage profile in Warzone is 175 up close and 125 at longer ranges. So that's going to help it a little bit within Warzone, but keep in mind you're not going to be able to get a one-shot kill on a fully armored enemy, or even an enemy that has 2 armor plates equipped. As for our rate of fire, this is 174 milliseconds, which is pretty slow for most semi-autos in the game. Like if you're comparing it to a pistol or an assault rifle, it's pretty slow. But if we compare it to the other sniper rifles, it's about 4 times as fast as the AX-50 or the HDR, so that's one of the benefits to using the Dragunov over those other 2 snipers. Now what this means for our time to kill is if we get a one-shot kill, obviously we're going to have a 0 millisecond time to kill. However, if we need that second shot, our time to kill value is going to be 345 milliseconds, which isn't so great up close, but at longer ranges, it's actually fairly competitive. Speaking of ranges, as you can see here, we have a totally different range chart here just because for the sniper rifles, it's almost impossible to find lines of sight long enough to reach some of the drop-off points on the regular multiplayer maps in this game. And that should definitely tell you something about the sniper rifles. You normally don't have to worry too much about range drop-off unless you're like in ground war, for instance, where you have much longer lines of sight. But with the Dragunov, you can see here our one-shot kill potential to the upper torso, this extends out to 62 meters. And this might seem really impressive because compared to most of the other guns in the game, that's a very impressive range drop-off. However, when you put it side by side with the other sniper rifles, this isn't very good in this department. So just keep that in mind. If you are really stretching that range out with the Dragunov, you definitely want to try and hit that headshot. Otherwise, it's going to take you at least 2 shots to kill. As for the suppressors that impact your range, the lightweight suppressor will reduce this range value by 25%, which isn't a very good thing to be doing. However, the monolithic suppressor actually gives us a 10% boost to our range, which is fairly small, but it is nice. Moving on to hipfire, all the sniper rifles have the same hipfire properties, and generally speaking, you don't want to be hipfiring unless it's a really desperate situation and you're practically touching the enemy player. As for our idle sway, this is quite important for sniper rifles, and it does seem like the 3 sniper rifles have pretty much the same idle sway. There might be some slight differences, but generally speaking, the Dragunov is pretty standard for the sniper rifles. Now, when it comes to recoil, I was actually quite surprised to see that there isn't a ton of recoil with the Dragunov. Of course, if you're at really long ranges, this is a lot of recoil, but if you're at kind of a mid-range with this, you're using it more like a DMR, it's pretty respectable when it comes to this. Getting into aim down sight time, this is extremely important for sniper rifles, and because of that, I am going to be going into much greater detail with various attachments later on in the video. But our base aim down sight time with the Dragunov is the fastest in the sniper rifle category at 534 milliseconds. Now keep in mind, this is the amount of time it takes from the moment the animation starts to the moment you're able to start holding your breath. Technically speaking, you are perfectly accurate towards the center of your screen a little bit before this time, so if you're quickscoping, you can quickscope faster than this, but I needed a way to have consistency with my measurements, and that's why I use the amount of time it takes before that indicator pops up showing you can hold your breath. As for our sprint out times, our standard sprint out time is 300 milliseconds, and our tactical sprint out time is 400 milliseconds, but these values don't really matter too much for a sniper rifle. Now our magazine capacity is 10 rounds with 20 in reserve, which is very good for a sniper rifle, and our reload add time is pretty average at 2.14 seconds. So if you wanted to speed that up, you could cut that down with the sleight of hand weapon perk, which brings that down to 1.4 seconds, which is very fast. Now, another stat that I normally don't cover with the other guns because it's not as important is the amount of time it takes to swap to a pistol, for instance. So just to keep things consistent, I swapped to the X16 pistol and then measured the time. This, of course, will change depending on the gun that you're swapping to. But I was extremely surprised to find that the Dragunov actually has the slowest weapon swap time out of all of the sniper rifles in the game, at 751 milliseconds. Now, it's not significantly slower than the others or anything, it's just a small amount, but if you would have asked me before I did my testing, I would have guessed that the Dragunov would be the fastest in this area. Now, one area where it is the fastest in the sniper category is the movement speed. Our standard movement speed is 91%, and our aim down sight stray speed is extremely slow, but it is for all of the sniper rifles at 30%. You're basically locked in place while aim down sight. Now, one last thing I want to look at before we get into the unique attachments of the Dragunov that's important with sniper rifles is the amount of bullet drop that we have. So what I did here is a test at 100 meters to see exactly how high I could hold above the enemy character's head in order to hit that character in the head. I did my best to test this to the absolute limit of how high, like even just a couple pixels higher than I was aiming, it would be a miss. And you can see there's not that much bullet drop at 100 meters with the base Dragunov, although there is a little bit. Whereas if you use the shorter barrel, the 510mm barrel, this one doubles the amount of bullet drop that you get, and therefore you really have to compensate for this when you get to really long ranges. As for the longer barrel, the 660mm barrel, this one actually cuts our bullet drop in half. So with this, you barely have to hold over your target at 100 meters. And because of this is often your best bet in ground war or Warzone, for instance, because those headshots at long ranges are very important. And this is going to be the easiest way to get those consistent long-range headshots. Now, that finally covers it for the base stats of the Dragunov. Now let's move into these unique attachments, and the first one is the 510mm compact barrel, which we already looked at the bullet drop. But with this, we get improved aim down sight speed. It's actually 4 frames faster at 60 FPS, which is a very significant reduction to our aim down sight time. And also, our overall movement speed is improved by about 1%. Now, the downsides to this are, first off, a loss of bullet velocity, which reduces your bullet drop and also makes it a bit more difficult to lead your target at longer ranges. And on top of this, we have a hidden downside, which is a 15% reduction to our damage range. But finally, that leaves us with one more downside, and this is to our recoil control, which, as you can see here, there's definitely a little bit more recoil with this barrel, but it's really not a massive increase if you just look at the gap between each one of those shots. Moving on to the second barrel, this is the 660mm extended barrel, and with this one, we get a 30% increase to our damage range, which is awesome. And on top of that, we get improved bullet velocity, which helps with our bullet drop, and also improved recoil control, which if we have a look at it right here, this is actually a pretty nice reduction to our recoil, and therefore that's another great benefit with this. However, the downsides to this is, first off, we get a pretty significantly slower aim down sight time at 601 milliseconds, which is 4 frames slower at 60 FPS. And on top of this, our overall movement speed is reduced by 2%. In regular multiplayer, I would say this barrel is completely unnecessary and overkill because you're not going to be getting into super long range fights anyways. However, if you're playing ground war or Warzone, I highly recommend using this barrel. As for the next unique attachments, we have the 15-round extended mag, and with this one, our aim down sight speed is slowed down by 1 frame at 60 FPS, which isn't too terrible when you consider the total length of the aim down sight time, and it also reduces our movement speed by 2%. Now, if we wanted to go bigger, you can go with a 20-round magazine, and with this one, it's basically the same thing as the previous one, but our movement speed is reduced a little bit more at 2.5%. Now that about covers it for the unique attachments on this gun. However, like I said earlier, I wanted to go into greater detail with our aim down sight times just because this is such an important stat with sniper rifles. First up, I'm going to show you the non-optical attachments that impact your aim down sight speed. And I'm not really going to discuss this in super great detail because you can just pause this and see the numbers for yourself, but I do have them ordered in the most helpful to the most punishing. And you can see there that the tac laser gives you the best benefit to aim down sight time, so it's a great choice, especially because it almost eliminates your idle sway as well. And also, I was a little bit surprised to see that the scout stock, the one that helps with your aim down sight time, it actually barely helps. It's only helping you by 1 frame at 60 FPS. As for the optics, I went in and tested the aim down sight time with all of the optics, and you can see there the most helpful one's going to be that VLK 3x sight. And another really interesting thing here is the Merc thermal sight. It states that it helps your aim down sight speed, but it actually hurts it a little bit. So just be aware of that. It is a bit misleading when it comes to that. But I should also mention, if you are using an optic that has 2 different zoom levels, like the variable zoom scope for instance, it's the same aim down sight time whether you're zoomed in or zoomed out. So finally, one last thing I'm going to go through are just a couple great attachment combinations that I like. One for regular multiplayer like 6v6 and 10v10, and then another one that's more so designed for ground war or Warzone. So for regular multiplayer, like I said, you're not going to find really long lines of sight anyways most of the time, so we don't need to increase our range with any barrels or anything, but at the same time, I didn't want to decrease it by putting the shorter barrel on. But with this particular build, it's kind of designed to be more like a DMR, rather than a sniper rifle. And with this, we're using a monolithic suppressor just so we can stay off the radar, and that little range boost I guess doesn't hurt. But with that, we're using the tac laser to help with our aim down sight time, as well as our aiming steadiness, so we should never really have to hold our breath within the ranges that we're fighting in, especially because we're also using the VLK 3x optic, which isn't amazing at ridiculously long ranges anyways, it's more so designed for those mid-range fights, and this one will also help with our aim down sight time, so we'll be snapping on a target pretty quickly. For our weapon perk, we've got Focus, which just helps with that flinch resistance, which is very important if you're in a face-to-face gunfight. And then finally, the 20-round extended mag, just because why not? You might as well go big. So that's for regular multiplayer, like I said, more so designed for those mid-range encounters. Now I want to get into the more sniper rifle style setup that's best used for ground war and Warzone. With this one, once again, we've got that monolithic suppressor. I find it's really important to stay off the radar within Warzone, plus the added range boost on top of the 660mm barrel is really nice. And another reason we're using that 660mm barrel is for bullet drop. That's very, very important so you can land those really consistent headshots, which is very important when you're trying to snipe with this. As for laser, once again, we do have the tac laser on there. This is mainly just to counteract the reduction we have in our aim down sight speed from the barrel and the monolithic suppressor, so it just kind of keeps that a little bit in line. And once again, we've got that focus weapon perk. This is really important if you're aiming down sight at somebody and they've got like an assault rifle, for instance. If they put even just one bullet into you at a longer range, you're going to be way off target without focus. Whereas with focus, you can stay at least within the realm of being on target, so you can land that headshot on them. But finally, this just leaves us with, once again, that 20-round extended mag, just because there's really not that much of a downside to using it, and it's kind of nice to be able to just keep spamming shots at people without having to reload all the time. But with that, that pretty much wraps it up for today's gun guide on the Dragunov. As for my thoughts on this sniper rifle, I do think it's a little bit underrated for ground war, for instance. I really like using this with an overkill setup when I'm using an SMG or an assault rifle as my primary. That way I can be running around with my primary weapon, but if I ever get into a situation where somebody's really far away or they're just really carefully utilizing cover and just barely showing like the tip of their head, I can really quickly swap to the Dragunov, and most importantly, I can snap on a target very fast with the Dragunov compared to the other sniper rifles and just get that quick headshot before swapping back to my primary. This is where the Dragunov really excels for me at least. I don't like this sniper rifle in Warzone though. I think this is your worst choice for Warzone, and I really don't see a good place for the Dragunov within Warzone because you just don't have that same one-shot headshot potential as the other sniper rifles. So it just seems like kind of a waste to be using the Dragunov when you could just as easily be using the AX50 or the HDR, which both of those do have that one-shot headshot potential when the enemy has full armor. But with that, I'd like to know in the comment section below, what do you guys think about the Dragunov? Do you think it is kind of underrated for modes like Ground War? Or do you think it's just terrible? Or do you think it's even great? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.